So, two small corrections. Not the father, at best a father. Secondly, I was not going to go through my early history, but the Superman story is, as a kid growing up in New York, you learn to handle yourself well. And what does a young boy do as a kid in New York? Well, you play with puzzles and games and comic books. And I was an avid comic book reader. And one day, and I loved gadgets, of course. And one day I was reading a Superman comic book, and in the middle, in the centerfold, was a description of how to build something called a crystal radio. So that looked interesting. What fascinated me was the fact that I could build it and it would cost me nothing. Didn't even need a battery. For example, what I needed was an empty toilet paper roll, which I could find, and wrap some wire around it to make an inductor. And my father's used razor blade and a pencil lead would make a crystal. And I needed an earphone. I didn't have an earphone, but I knew that the candy store downstairs had a telephone booth. In the telephone booth was a phone where you could unscrew the earphone. So I stole the damn earphone. And then I needed something called a variable capacitor. And I didn't quite know what that was, but I knew I can get one. That was down in the electronics row in New York, which is Canal Street, downtown Manhattan. So my mother took me down there in the subway. I walked up to the first electronics store, and I banged my fist on the table and said, "I need a variable capacitor." And he said, "What size?" I had no idea. So it blew my cover. I told him what I wanted to do, and he knew exactly what I needed. He sold me a part. It did cost a nickel. Took it home, wired it up, and I could hear music. No batteries, no power, nothing. And that was amazing. And it was magic. Magic, and that's important. I'm sure you people have been exposed to things that seem like magic to you. Maybe that's why you're here in a computer science course. So you want to explore it. I spent the rest of my life trying to figure out how the damn thing worked, and I'm not sure yet how it does. But it's a fascinating technology, and those kinds of experiences as a young person, and you are young people, affect the directions you take and the view you have and the self-image you have as you go along. And I'm not going to give you a whole set of life lessons today. That was not the purpose. I'm going to talk about a brief history of the internet. But those life lessons are important. And one of them is to follow your curiosity. And since you got me started on this, one other very important life lesson is to have confidence in yourself. Believe you can achieve. Reach beyond your grasp. Okay, don't try the easy things. Set a goal for yourself that may confront you or you create yourself, which is just beyond your grasp. I don't care what it is. It doesn't have to be electronics, it doesn't have to be computers. It could be catching a baseball, it could be writing a poem, playing an instrument. In my case, it was becoming an Eagle Scout. I was challenged to become an Eagle Scout. When I joined the Boy Scouts, nobody in my troop had done it, and that was really tough. It was kid in New York, concrete jungle. How do you learn how to make a fire? Well, you learn how to make a fire in the streets. That's true, but chopping wood and all. So and I did achieve it, and it was very hard. But the point is, once I did that, I realized that I could achieve things that looked tough, and that gave me the kind of confidence that has driven me through the rest of my life. And you may have already found those successes along the way, but mark them, remember them, and believe you can achieve other hard, challenging things. It's really important for your own self-image. So let's talk about a brief history of the internet. So I have a friend, he's called Larry Garwood, and his father asked him, "What is the internet?" And Larry came up with a great answer. He said, "The internet, it's everything. Past, present, and future." Well, his father was a bit of a curmudgeon, so his father basically challenged him. He said, "Look, son, I was in the Canadian Navy in World War II, and I was the commander of LCA 1375, Landing Craft Assault 1375. And this is about 50 years later from the World War II. His challenge says, "Sonny, you're so smart, go find that damn thing on your internet." So Larry searched around, and he went to the web and he went around. He couldn't find anything. And finally he went to the Canadian Maritime Museum on the web, and he found some pictures. He found a picture of the ship which carried the assault craft on which his father served. This ship happens to be coming around the Straits of Gibraltar. It was involved in an attack on the southern portion of Europe, something called Dragoon, not D-Day, but around the same time. And cruising around the Mediterranean, they hit a sea mine, and it blew a hole in the hull of their ship. They plugged it with a lifeboat and limped off to a Greek port and spent many weeks repairing this fracture in the boat. And the sailors got restless. I mean, these were fighting men ready to go to war, and here they are at a Greek port doing nothing. So they decided, let's get on a landing craft and visit the port of Athens, Piraeus. Now, these landing craft, first of all, have no weapons. Everything that can shoot something, the Navy and the Marines carry with them. So they're unarmed. And Piraeus was occupied by the Germans. So these guys, courageously, they want to have some fun. So they're sailing, imagine you're a German soldier here, and you know this attack is going to come sooner or later. And you look at the horizon, and you see these landing craft coming over the horizon. And you panic. The invasion is on. So they did panic. They blew up the warehouses, and they evacuated. Lucky for these guys, okay? There was no combat. So these guys came in, and the local citizenry were thrilled. They said, "You have liberated us." They come out, and they get on the landing craft, and they piddle around. And son of a gun, there's his father's landing craft, 1375. And guess what? There's his father. That's the internet, okay? It's all there. Search one way or another and find the data you want. So, okay. Let's fast forward to 1969. It was an incredible year. A lot of very interesting things happened in 1969. We landed a man on the moon. Not bad. A bunch of young people were romping around in the Catskill Mountains in New York, having a lot of fun. Woodstock. It was a cultural change. An event with probability 0 occurred. Okay. Charles Manson went on a killing spree here in Los Angeles. You may or may not know about it, but it was really brutal stuff. And, by the way, the internet was born. And guess what? Nobody noticed. But it probably had more impact than all those other events. The sub-message here is, as I'll repeat later, is you don't often know that what you're working on may be very important and very critical. So the lesson to learn from that, as I'll repeat later, is whatever you work on, if you're going to devote your energy on something, do it well. Whether or not it's important, do it well. Don't waste your time. Okay? And if it is important and you did it well, then there's that much more success. At this point, we had no idea this was really an important thing. So, I want you to think about these nouns, if you will, okay? Ethics, trust, open, free, shared. That was the culture of the early internet. We were all a cooperative group of engineers, scientists, trying to solve a problem, which was to create a network among people and machines. And it was a good group of folks who trusted each other. And they were not after economic gain. This was a challenging engineering project. The idea was to do something, and the reward we got was if you use something I put on the early internet, that was my reward. A piece of software, a piece of hardware, an application, a service. That was the king. And I knew everybody on the internet at that point. And they were all my friends, and they were to be trusted. And there was a trap in that. The trap is that today not everybody in the internet is trustable, and we didn't protect against it because we didn't see a need for it. We didn't install any security capability. I'll come back to that later. Okay. Well, what makes the internet tick? Well, you know what it is. It's two things. It's the people who basically make their work available, all their creative work, and basically the culture which allows it to be shared. This openness, this sharing, this trust, etc. And in a large sense, one of the things the internet does, it creates communities of like-minded people who have an interest in common, and they want to share it. Okay. What has it changed? It's changed some basic things in our life, basically. It's reduced the notion of distance. Not that distance is unimportant, but it's no longer a barrier. In fact, it could be an enabler. It's increased how far you can reach, how many people you can reach, the speed with which you can reach them. And you could basically, it's increased your ability to be anonymous. And the cost, of course, is almost minimum, and how much you can get is unlimited. Okay. So, it's removed certain barriers, as I said. One barrier, political barriers, economic barriers, social barriers, cultural barriers, racial barriers, physical handicaps, physical appearance. You could be unshaven, dirty, grubby, in the basement hovel, and have as much impact or appearance on the network as the most grand, wealthy, powerful individual. And I'm sure you've all seen this cartoon. It came out of the New Yorker a long time ago. It's a picture of a big dog on the internet talking to a little dog. And the big dog says to the little dog, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. Well, that's been true for a while, but I'm sure you realize now they do know you're a dog. They know what you had for lunch. They know where you are. They know where you're going or what movie you just saw. But there's a basic notion of anonymity and ability to overcome certain handicaps that might have been in your way in the physical world. So that's both a mixed blessing. Okay. But there's no way back, okay? Your generation can't conceive of a time when you couldn't do all the things you do, photos, chatting, streaming, shopping, and we can't ever turn the clock back. I'm sure you never even thought about turning the clock back. You know, the internet is in your DNA. You've grown up with it. You've played with it from the time you were infants, probably. But there's another generation of people out there like myself for whom the internet was an innovation, a new thing, and it's not something that necessarily they navigate as well as you do, which is a very natural way. So you have to recognize there's a mixed capability out there. Okay. Everyone knows about the internet. My 10-year-old granddaughter knows about it. My 99-year-old mother knew about it. It's penetrating everything you do in your lives. This is not news to you. And there's huge challenges and enormous opportunities. Whenever there's a challenge, it presents an opportunity. And the opportunities that you have to find as you move along through your careers. But it's in its teenage years. It's a young thing. It's beyond infancy. But what do teenagers do? They don't behave well, okay? It's mischievous, it's erratic, it's unruly and disobedient. And not behaving very well. And we hope it'll mature and grow out of this phase and become a more reliable, trustworthy adult. Perhaps. We can't guarantee that. Okay. So let's go to this history of the internet. I'm going to show you and read you a quote, and I want you to tell me, who do you think made this quote? And imagine what it is they're talking about. It will be possible for a businessman in New York to dictate instructions and have them instantly appear in type at his office in London or elsewhere. He'll be able to call up from his desk and talk to any telephone subscriber on the globe. An inexpensive instrument, not bigger than a watch, will enable its bearer to hear anywhere, on sea or land, music or song, speech of a political leader, address of an eminent man of science, or the sermon of an eloquent clergyman, delivered in some other place, however distant. In the same manner, any picture, character, drawing or print can be transferred from one to another place. Now, first of all, I think you can appreciate whoever said this was talking about what we now call the internet. Most of the vision is there. Question is, who do you think said this, and how long ago was it? Guess. Okay. Now guess. Tesla. Exactly. Nikola Tesla. More than 100 years ago. My point here is that There's nothing new under the sun. These visions of different technologies have been around for a long time. He could envision it. He couldn't quite implement what we see today because the technology wasn't yet there. But people could imagine that this capability would eventually come. In fact, nowhere in the text do you see the word video, because there was no video. Well, we've added video in big time these days. Okay? But he had basically drawings and prints there. Okay. There were other early visionaries. I'll go through them quickly. H.G. Wells, The World Brain in 1938. Vannevar Bush in 1945, MEMEX. 1960, Licklider with his galactic network. People imagining various aspects of what we now call the internet. In fact, in 69, I did articulate a vision. I'll show it to you later. And in the 1970s, I showed the following photo, which shows basically a woman sitting at a terminal with no wires connected to it in Central Park accessing what would become the internet. So these pictures, this is way before mobility was entered at all. We could imagine these things happening. Okay, so let's review that. 105 years ago, a vision from afar, Tesla, okay? 75 years ago, the world brain, 68 years, MEMEX, 50 years ago, galactic network, in the theory of packet networks. 44 years ago, the birth of the internet, 1969. 23 years ago, nerds before the web. 14 years ago, billionaires on the dot-com era. 13 years ago, the post-com bubble burst, great disappointment, and today, a global financial crisis. So this is sort of a quick glimpse of the last century during which the internet was created. Let's look at before the beginning. What was going on that really motivated people to actually implement a network? Well, it all began in 1957 when Sputnik was launched. Russians put up a space satellite, circled the Earth going beep, 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 annoyed the heck out of the United States. They were the first in space. And then President Eisenhower said that will never happen again, will not fall behind in science and technology. So he gracefully created what's called the Advanced Research Projects Agency, ARPA, as a response. The idea of this agency was to support science and technology in the United States across the board with excellent funding and good management and good ideas. So, the early role of ARPA in creating the internet was as follows, okay? 62, the same Licklider, he joined ARPA and he created the computer part of the agency where they were beginning to support computer research. It was called the Information Processing Techniques Office, IPTO. In 64, a classmate of mine, Ivan Sutherland, succeeded Licklider as director. And he came here to UCLA. He knew I was already here by 63. He said, Len, you have 3 identical IBM mainframes here. Identical. Let's connect them together. Let's experiment with networking. In the easiest possible case, identical machines. And it never happened. Not because the technology was not there, it certainly was, because the political infighting among the entities that ran those machines. It was a health school, health department, business school, and the university. And every one of those executives in terms of those machines said, you can't, I'm not going to put my machine on a network because I'm using it 100% of the time. I'm overloaded. I don't want somebody else to share my time. So they all said no. Very short-sighted, but that was the prevalent attitude then and for a number of years. So it didn't happen. But the idea of a network was now somehow beginning to percolate at ARPA, just the concept. Okay. In 1965, another classmate of mine at MIT, Larry Roberts, he got an ARPA contract, and he tried to send data across the country, from Lincoln Lab to Scientific Data Corporation, Systems Data Corporation, SDC here in Santa Monica, and on a dial-up connection. It was a mess. There was no error control, no flow control, no congestion control. They managed to get a few bits across, but he recognized this is not the way to send data between computers. Okay. The next director of IPTO was Robert Taylor. He succeeded Sutherland. And he recognized that he needed a network to connect together the computers of the various researchers that he was supporting across the country. And the reason was the following. He'd support somebody else, and give them piles of money and good funding, and each of these individuals would develop a unique center University of Utah developed excellent graphics. UCLA, simulation. SRI, database. University of Illinois, high-performance machines. Each one became a very unique, specialized center depending upon the expertise of the researchers there. Along comes a new guy, he says, and we say, look, you're a good guy, we're going to support you. First thing you say is, buy me a computer. Fine, we'll buy you a computer. Next thing you say is, I want the capability all those other guys has, graphics, simulation, database, etc. And Arpa said, no, we can't afford to give everybody all of that. So we're going to put you in a network. And you want to do graphics, you log onto his machine. You want to do high performance, you log onto his machine. So that was the reason behind the Arpanet. And I'm going to repeat this picture in just a moment. But I want you now to burst an urban myth. Many people believe that the Arpanet, which was the predecessor of the Internet, was created to protect the United States against a nuclear attack by the Russians. It's a myth. You ask the average citizen outside, if they know anything about it, they'll probably say that. And it's wrong. There's reasons why they think that, but the motivation here was to do resource sharing among the resources that were in the ARPA community. Okay. So what Taylor did, recognizing he wanted to know, he brought Larry Roberts in as a chief scientist to help make that happen. And we're going to get back to the ARPA story shortly because we have to talk about where is the technology these people are going to try to implement. So let's go back to what I call the emerging threads of inquiry. While ARPA grew over this period, started in '58, remember, the research community was independently generating the technology that would eventually become the Internet. There were three groups. One was at MIT, that was mine, and a key paper was in April of '62 where I talked about what's now called packet networks. There was another effort by Paul Barron right down the street in Santa Monica at Rand Corporation. His key paper was in September '62 talking about other aspects of packet switching. And a little time later in England, National Physical Laboratory, Donald Davies, who basically did his work and presented it here in mid-'65, he's the fellow who coined the word packet for packet switching. Before that, we were calling them message blocks, etc. Okay. So I'm going to take you through part of the MIT thread so I can tell you the kind of work I did and the view that I had. Again, that was the period we're talking about. In 1959, I started working on my PhD with a wonderful person named Claude Shannon. That's what he looks like. How many of you have heard his name before? Three people. Look him up. Brilliant guy. He's responsible for much of the information revolution we have today. Just look up his history. And you could just, brilliant scientist, brilliant mathematician, great guy to work for. So in '61, I basically submitted my PhD proposal to model and analyze data networks. And in the proposal, it says things like the nodes will receive, sort, store, transmit messages that enter and leave via the links. So the idea of going hop, hop, hop across a network, which is not the way networks operated in those days. And using a tool out of queuing theory called queuing networks. By the way, for those English majors here, this is the only word in English with 5 vowels in a row. And it's because I chose the British way to spell queuing. The American way usually drops that E. But add the E so you can amaze your friends with 5 vowels in a row. Okay. As I told you, in April '62, I first introduced the idea of chopping messages to fixed length blocks and evaluating what would happen when you did that from a performance evaluation way. December '62, I filed my dissertation, having developed, as you heard earlier, the mathematical theory of packet networks. It became a book in 1964, went out of print. Dover reprinted it, it went out of print. Dover recently reprinted it, and that's what it looks like right now. That's 2007 when they reprinted it. Okay. What did I look at? Issues of scalability. How do you make these networks big? The reason I wanted to do large networks is because studying under Shannon, his philosophy was that emergent properties occur when you put together a lot of things together. A 5-node network is not going to exhibit the properties of a 1,000 or a 10,000 node network. His great contribution was in coding theory, which had talked about very long sequences and how when they got long, you could predict the way they would behave because of certain statistical theorems. So I wanted to do large networks. To do large networks, you can't give all the control to any single node. There's too much traffic, it's too vulnerable. It takes too long to get the information in and out. So you have to distribute the control. The idea of adaptive and distributed routing became very important. How to do an optimal design, how to share resources in a network, and what were the principles that would emerge once you, in fact, did talk about these large network design issues. So, the key results that I got out of my dissertation is I set up the model, I used queuing theory. Airline was the father of queuing theory back in the early 1900s. Introduced an independence assumption I'm going to talk to you about. I evaluated how networks perform under that model. Having done the analysis and solved the model, I could then develop optimal design procedures. Just how much capacity should each line have? What should the topology look like? What should the routing procedure look like, etc.? And here they are. How large should the messages be? Should you break them up, etc.? Talked about a distributed adaptive routing, and evaluated those different queuing disciplines, including what became packetizing, namely packet switching. So let's take you through a little bit of mathematics. Here's a network. Suppose you wanted to know on average how long does it take a message to pass through that network? On average. Well, let's look at call T the average network delay, and that's averaged over all pairs of nodes. And the answer is you can write down an expression which is an exact mathematical expression for what that performance metric is, where lambda is the traffic going on the ith node in messages per second, and gamma is the messages per second passing through the network throughput, and Ti is the average time it takes you to wait for and use this ith channel. So that's an excellent and exact equation, except there's one problem. How do you find that term? The others you get from the traffic matrix. And the answer is it's hard. In fact, it's intractable. Okay, so you don't study that problem, you go somewhere else. You surrender, or do you? No, you don't. You think about it, you work hard, you try to find a way around that issue. And what I did is I put in an assumption. So the key assumption was what I call the independence assumption. What it happens to say is that each time a message enters a new node, its length is randomly chosen all over again. And then it goes on. Another node randomly changes length. That's a false assumption, right? It's clearly wrong. A message at a certain length goes hop, hop, hop to the network. But, just to go on, without that assumption, the problem's intractable. With it, it becomes totally manageable. So you can try to solve it under that false assumption, and then ask yourself, does it affect the result? How would you test to see if that assumption was a good or a bad assumption? Supposing you were right at this stage in your research. Put in an assumption, the mathematics goes through, I got an answer. Was it a good assumption? What would you do? Test it. How do you test it? Against what? Who said that? How would you test it? You're right. So that means you have to build a network. Ooh. Build a whole network and see if that little assumption is right. That's one way, and that's the way a lot of software is developed, right? They throw it out to see if it works. A lot of systems, planes crash. Okay. There's another way you can do it too. Using a computer simulation. Set up a model in the computer which has two versions. One is the exact version without the assumption. The other is the model with the assumption. Measure both, let them run, and compare the results. I did that, and sure enough, they were excellent. They were almost indistinguishable. So the assumption, whereby it's false, allowed you to break through the mathematics. Great. Okay. And once you get that, you can then do some nice other mathematics. So that's what you get for the time to pass through the ith channel, where mu ci is the capacity of the channel in messages per second. The details are not important. I just want to show you an approach. The general optimization problem, once you got the answer, now you can say, well, what's the best we can do? So what you want to do is you want to minimize the response time. By changing what? By changing how much capacity you put in each channel, what kind of a routing procedure, what kind of a queuing discipline, and what kind of a topology you create. So it allows one to actually look at those things. And you subject it to a fixed cost constraint. Okay, basically, this is the number of dollars you want to spend. This is the dollars you spend for the ith channel. You don't want to spend more than this many dollars. What's the best you can do? You set up, and it turns out you can solve this baby. Okay? You get exact solution for di equals 1, arbitrary di, etc. And it tells you a lot about what the network should look like. Again, just an approach to the way you think about research. There are underlying principles that you can then evaluate. You know, what is this thing telling me? I got the answer. I've even done some optimal design. But what is it telling me? You know, what can I take away to use in bigger design issues or talk about systems related to it? I mean, this is, again, lesson number 3. You're going to see it later again. You solve a problem. Say, OK, done. Next. No, what did it tell me? Is there an intuition I can carry around in my head for the rest of my life about these things? Well, there were some things that bubble up. That resource sharing is key. For example, what kinds of traffic do you see in a computer-to-computer communication or from a person-to-computer communication? Well, you can't tell exactly when they're going to want to send a message. You don't tell me when you're going to hit carriage return or return. I don't know how large a thing is that you want to send. Most of the time, you don't want to send anything. You're sitting there with a keyboard. Click, 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 go. Click, 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 go. Most of the time, that bandwidth, that channel, the network is waiting eternities for you to say, transmit something. So, they won't tell you when, how much. They almost never need it. But when they want it, baby, they want it now. I want instant response time. Well, that's a tough thing to solve in general. There are various ways to deal with this. It's called a conflict, okay? More than one person may want the same resource at the same time. I don't want to necessarily dedicate a resource to you, but suppose I did. Well, one thing I do is I go to queuing. In queuing, a lot of people want the same resource, the same channel, the same whatever at the same time. Well, in queuing, one of them gets served and the others wait. It's a nice civilized way to behave. There's also splitting. You chop it up in little pieces. I'll give each of you a piece. You each get a little piece. Everybody gets served slowly. Blocking. One person gets it, the other have to go away. Okay? There's one seat left on the airplane. One person gets it. That's it. Or smashing. 2 people want it. Nobody gets it. That's called Ethernet. A collision on Ethernet, bang, nobody got it, right? And so you have to think about it. These are various ways to, well, queuing is the most civilized, the most reasonable, and that's what I used. And it turns out that's a very effective way, because a queue is a perfect resource sharing device. Suppose we have something, say a computer with processing capacity, and a bunch of people want to use it, okay? Well, if I assign this to you and you own it for 3 hours, and you own it the next 3 hours, and next, you got to wait 9 hours before you get your turn, which is crazy, okay? A queue says, look, I'm not going to pre-assign it. Whoever's here is waiting gets it. And if it's 2 people, one waits while the other gets it. The system is always being utilized when any work is to be done, and nobody gets lost. So it's dynamically allocated to the demand as it arises. That's what queuing does. So it's a very effective thing. The resource sharing, demand access. Only assign a resource to a data that's present. And here's different forms of queuing. It's called method switching, packet switching, polling, asynchronous time division multiplexing, and lots of other ways to do it. But packet switching is what we chose to do. Economy of scale. There's an economy in terms of almost every metric as you make systems larger. And I was able to show that was the case. For example, suppose I had a system. I'm doing too much educating here instead of just telling you the history, but I'm a professor, so sorry. Suppose I had a system, say a queuing system, or a competition for a time-sharing system or something. Suppose I have this much throughput and this much capacity. Well, under that load, there'll be a certain response time for how long it takes to get through. Say it's my third hand here, okay? Throughput, capacity, response time. Now suppose I double the throughput, and let's double the capacity. That seems fair. What will happen to the response time? One of 3 things, right? Gets worse, stays the same, or gets better. Intuition says it stays the same. And that's what queuing theorists thought forever, and they were wrong. Turns out you halve the response time. If you go up by 1,000, you get 1,000th the response time, 1,000 times improvement. Because the difference between queuing theorists of old and engineers of this era is that you can change, with the queuing theory, you're a server. How fast can you work? 1 second per second. I can't speed you up any more than that. But with a communication channel, 100 bits per second, 1,000 bits, a megabit, a gigabit, I can speed up the channel. And by doing that, I can make the server work faster. And it turns out that's the kind of trade-off you get. Now, there's something to remember, okay? It's a kind of intuition. You learn something from this little result. But there's a number of things you can do with it. So I say here, if you scale up everything by the same factor, you reduce the response time by that factor. That's what I just showed you. Or if you scale capacity a little more slowly than throughput, you can hold the response time constant. You'll see what that means in a minute. The efficiency will increase. And it can approach 100%. And in fact, you can prove all three. And here's the picture. Here's efficiency, and here's throughput. And here's a locus of constant response time. If I keep the response time constant, if I increase throughput and increase efficiency, look, no degradation of response time, efficiency went up, throughput went up. That's a good thing. And here's a whole family of those for different response times. Or, if I hold the efficiency constant, what's happening as I move along here? I'm increasing throughput, that's good. And look, I'm reducing the response time, 10, 4, 3, 2, 1. So here I get response time improving, throughput increasing, constant efficiency. Or, I could do all three at the same time, if you follow a curve like this. Improve the response time, improve the efficiency, and improve the throughput. I'm just saying, forget the formulas. Realize this kind of trade-off is taking place in these systems. You can analyze it if you like, but it's important to remember you can vary the gains that you achieve by varying the way in which you follow this graph. Okay. Here's another economy of scale in networks. Here's a network, has a certain throughput and a certain cost. If you look at networks, you'll find that that's the locus of network designs. It sits along a line like this. Now, does that demonstrate an economy of scale, that bigger is better? The answer is yes. Let's build a small network. A small network means a little bit of throughput. It costs a little bit. But look at the slope of that line. The slope of that line is throughput per unit dollar. And it's a small slope, if you will. If I build a large network, which means a lot of throughput, look at the slope of that line. It's much larger. So I got more units of throughput per dollar I spent in a large network than I did in a small network. It just happens to be the case when you design things. You can look at the other inverse of that, dollars per kilobit per second versus throughput. Small net costs you a lot, big network less. Okay. The point is, if you get these results, don't just write them down and walk away. Ask what they're telling you. Try to extract the principle out of it. So, this research, coming back to the history now, these research communities were putting together this technology as how to build a data network. Okay? And in the early 60s, as this network technology was being developed on paper, we said, well, we ought to implement this thing. So we promoted it to the telecom industry. Who was the biggest telecommunications carrier in those days? AT&T. So you go to AT&T and say, look, here's a design for a data network. Forget about voice networks for the minute, which is what they were doing. Eventually, computers are going to have to talk to each other. When they do, you want a network that can support it efficiently. Their response was, it won't work. And even if it does work, we want nothing to do with it. That was AT&T's response. Short-sighted, but why did they say that? They said that because they had a wonderful voice network, which was highly productive and basically profitable. And there was no data to send. There were no machines talking to each other at that time. Why should they build a network? Which is great for data, but there's no traffic. So they had a very short view of what the future might look like. They made a big mistake, and it cost them big time. Okay. Nobody cared. ARPA was now poised to take advantage of the technology and put it together. So ARPA steps in. Licklight had already described the network. The theory and design were available. Basically, Sutherland thought about a network. Taylor had seen a need. Larry was there to make it happen. And he was basically, he was a classmate and an office mate of mine. So he knew that this would work. He was willing to spend millions of dollars. Bang, off we go. 1967, this is the story I told you before. The researcher said, give me everything. And ARPA said, no way. And here's an offer you can't refuse. Join a network. Why couldn't they refuse it? Because this guy was funding that guy. You want to be funded? You join a network. So it was basically dictated. You're going to join a network if you're going to stick with us. And that's what happened. 67, we got a bunch of people together to try to write down the spec. A fellow named Wes Clark from Lincoln Lab suggested don't burden the host computer with all its communication packet stuff. Make a separate machine to do it. We call those things routers these days. Initially, it could have been that you implanted it in the host machine, which would have been a terrible burden on every client of today, every host machine of those days. And the protocol conversions would have been horrible. So that was a good suggestion. An RFP went out, request for a proposal went out. And Christmas time of 1968, both Beranek and Newman won the contract. My lab at UCLA was selected to be the first node because we knew what was going on. BBM was supposed to deliver this new thing called this switch, which sits beside the machine, in 8 months to UCLA. So we were all busy. And what it looked like in 1969 was the following. Here was UCLA before September, which is when the first switch arrived. In September 69, that switch arrived. It was called an interface message processor, otherwise known as an IM, here at UCLA. That's what it looks like. I hope some of you have seen this. If not, you've got to go down to our lab and see it. It's about the size of a big telephone booth or refrigerator. That's what the control panel looked like. Inside, it's so ugly, it's beautiful. You have to enjoy it. If you get a chance, smell it. It has its own smell. You'll never forget it. It's days of yore and just wonderful odor. Anyway. So in October 69, SRI, 400 miles to the north in Menlo Park, got their switch and they connected it to their SDS 940 host computer. That was the first piece of the backbone internet, running at a blazing speed of 50,000 bits per second. You're smirking. In those days, that was fast. We were used to 1,200 bits per second at most. This is quite a bit more. Okay. So we put out a press release in 1969. I won't take you through the details. I'm quoted there as saying the following kinds of things. Mostly I was anticipating what we now call web-based IP services, anticipating always-on invisible technology, pointing out it's like an electric utility, and you could access it from anywhere in ubiquitous fashion. Okay. We decided to keep a log. Now you got to recognize we were engineers. This is not Madison Avenue, okay? We took an old computer log and repurposed it to our purposes. Bunch of engineers in the laboratory keeping a record. And the most important entry in that log is the following. It's right there. It was on October, this is important, remember these dates, October 29th, 1969, at 10:30 at night, we have an entry that says we talk to SRI host to host. That is, and here was the setup, by the way, as I showed you before. Our host, our switch, high-speed line, their switch, their host. We talk from this machine to that machine. That was the first message ever on the internet. What was the first message ever on the internet? Okay? Some of you must know this. Low, what? That's exactly right. The low came from login. A couple of you knew that. You all should know it. You will by the time the next 5 minutes is over, okay? But a more important question is how many of you ever thought to ask that question? Very few. And the question, why haven't you? And the answer probably is that this has been around forever. You never thought about it. You know the first message on the telephone, on the telegraph, man on the moon. In fact, here they are. It wasn't as good as what Samuel Morse did, what hath God wrought. Wow, that's a good message, okay? Most of us know that, should know it. Watson, come here, I need you. Okay, Alexander Graham Bell. Giant leap for mankind, Armstrong, okay? We weren't that smart. Those guys understood media and public relations. They put down a message that would be remembered. We just wanted to do, as you say, log in. All we want to do is log in. To do that, from our machine to theirs, you have to type LOG-IN. You type the LOG, the remote machine knows what you're doing, it'll type the IN for you. So we got ready. Here we are, setup. Charlie Klein, one of my software guys here, Bill Duval up at Stanford Research, and myself down here, with a telephone line just to be sure. And it's ironic, we're using a telephone network, the network we were trying to displace to prove our own technology. So we sent the L and he said, "You get the L?" Bill said, "Yep, got the L." Sent the O, "You get the O?" "Yep, got the O." Send the G, "You get the G?" Crash. So what was the first message ever on the internet? Lo, as in lo and behold. A better, more succinct, more prophetic message we couldn't have planned. But nobody knows it. It's your job to basically spread the word. It'll go down in history properly at some point, but it may be through your children, I don't know. What crashed? Wasn't our computer, wasn't our switch, wasn't the high-speed line, wasn't their switch, it was their host computer. So it wasn't our fault, okay? There was a memory overflow, and it had to do with the long time delay between typing and getting an echo back. Got fixed in within an hour and we were off and running. Okay, so that's important. Now you know the date, the time, location, and the first message. That's something to remember. Now, here again, I'm repeating that lesson. You don't know when critical events occur, so do them well and be proud of them. So the growth of the internet, from 69 to 88, it grew very well, rapidly, friendly, broadly, until Robert Morris unleashed the first internet worm in 1988. And we said, uh-oh. And then we said, oh, well, doesn't matter. Big mistake. Then it continued to grow over a very critical period to 94. Dot-coms came online, Backbone went to gigabit, web began to roll out, until Cantor and Siegel introduced spam. We said, uh-oh, and this time we said, ouch. That one hurt, and we got real mad. And we sent email back to them. They were advertising on our network. How dare they use this for crass commercial purposes? So we sent email back to them. We said, stop, you can't do that. Shame on you. Bad. We sent so much email back to them, we took down their server. So an unintended consequence of the first spam was the first denial of service attack. Unintended. Okay. So here's spam. Basically, we're advertising some green card capability. This is the first spam message. There it is. April 12th, 1994, early in the morning. It says, we're going to help you get green card. Come, buy our services. Okay. So the dark side suddenly had entered now. There's dark side, and here's all the bad stuff, and much more than you know of. So it's getting in our way now, okay? And the enablers for the internet have been that you can reach hundreds of millions of people easily, quickly, no cost, anonymously. And that's it, exactly the way to enable the dark side. It's a perfect formula for enabling dark side, especially that anonymity bit. Costs you nothing to hurt everybody. Nobody knows. Okay. Here's an example of dark side. I don't like the choices they give me here. Okay. And I have to credit Bill Cheswick for that one. So we had a grand opening in 2011 of the site where the first network began. And it's 3420 in Belter Hall. That's what it looked like in 2011. There's the imp. It's still there. We had a big crowd going around. I even had a chance to give a little lecture. And of course, my little granddaughter there was peeking out of the corner. I added that slide to point out this is a young person's technology, okay? And it's you people who are carrying it forward. So one last point is, you recognize that building? No. If you go to the right and go up the stairs toward the Court of Science, there's the stairs going up to the Court of Science. There's a little doorway here. Enters Belter Hall. Below, it's right underneath that room I just talked about. If you go into that doorway, open it up, you see this on the floor. And I think many of you know about it now. That's the first set, and that's up on the top of the stairs. You look at that thing, you say, that looks like binary code. And so does that, and that, and there they are. Well, if you lay them all out, there they are. If you look at the ASCII code, And just to help you, I'll wipe out the part that doesn't matter. And you can map each of these. For example, this particular one here is L. If you map it all out, you get that. And you lay that out, and it says, lo and behold, the architect, bless his heart, told nobody when he was laying those mosaics down a couple of years ago, just put it there and walked away. And it took 2 years for a computer science undergraduate to notice it. We have this message embedded in the hallway of our building. So, just to point out, the internet has been growing exponentially from time 0. It's not as if anything specifically happened. Okay, I'll stop right here because we're running out of time right now. I didn't hear the bell ring, but did it ring? Anyway, thank you very much.